Thanks for coming out, you guys. My name's Chris Parry. You may have seen me before. I'm usually the comic interlude or the contrarian interlude at best. Previous speeches I've given here are you guys nuts? All your kids are playing Minecraft. Why aren't you appealing to young investors? Or 5 of you guys will be dead by this time next year. It's time to bring younger people in. Today, it's the end of the cannabis run. I figured telling you guys how good gold is when you're already in gold is probably a waste of time, especially since 30 other presentations are all the same way. Good to see you, Braden Mackey, at the front. So, as you know, cannabis has been pretty big for the last 5-6 years. It's been pretty speculative. It's been fairly crappy along the way a lot of the time. A lot of the companies that were set up for success were not the ones that had success because they weren't set up for market cap success. They were set up for operational success. So we've been following a lot of companies in the last year that we know are headed to zero. Some of them the biggest market caps in the game. Some of them the smallest market caps in the game. One thing they all share is none of them were actually set up for a real business. They were set up for a market cap play. This is coming to a screeching halt because eventually you've got to actually sell some product, make some profit, and cannabis companies have shown, for the most part, they're unable to do so. So, just to recap the history in the last 6 years, billions of dollars raised, insane market caps built, massive numbers of new retail investors come in to fuel that monotonous rise, hundreds of RTOs and IPOs, and billions in revenue and profits. Just kidding. Absolutely none of that at all. So if cannabis is reaching its natural conclusion, there are a lot of people out there that are still convinced Cannabis 2.0 is going to be the thing that's going to bring people forward. That is just not going to happen as far as I'm concerned. This entire market, from the biggest companies up on down, were built simply for market cap. They were never really built to do strong business. They're essentially agriculture companies growing in greenhouses in the airport in Edmonton. Not exactly the best place to be growing a crop that's mostly equatorial. Regulators have also saddled these operators with rules and regulations that really stop you from being able to build a business. If you can't market your product, there's no real way that you're going to ever get ahead of everybody else. If you go to the online cannabis stores, what you find is people will generally search by price. They don't really have any brand loyalty, but for a couple of companies. And the offerings are not anywhere near as, let's say, reasonably priced as the guy behind the dumpster behind the pub. To me, the biggest opportunity in cannabis, and it has been from the outset, has been in industrial uses. That is, turning it into a product that can be put in another natural health food product. A bread, a juice, a drink. The actual smoking cannabis crowd is a pretty small crowd, and they've largely already had their suppliers for, I don't know, their entire lives. They don't need a government store to replace what they do. The real potential growth market is in you guys. It's in having a product that makes you sleep better, makes you a little healthier, doesn't necessarily get you stoned, and it maybe doesn't even have a cannabis leaf in the title or on the front of the product. That's not what the cannabis sector has really been geared towards. And though Cannabis Sector 2.0 has been touted as the savior, government regulations that were just released on edibles, beverages, etc., are only just really getting in the way more between the industry and their actual end consumer. So as an example, the opportunity that was out there, vapes were seen as a great white hope. They're an efficient delivery system. They're something that's palatable to older users. There's IP that can be made money from without actually having a product. They offer a consistent dosage. The reality, though, was that the government took too long to allow them. The non-cannabis vapes took over, ended up in the hands of kids, which parents don't like, and cannabis consumers went to the black market to get their vapes and ended up getting sick from faulty products. That's not what we want. Cannabis beverages, much the same deal. There's an opportunity there for a cannabis beverage to be a product that stretches beyond the smoker market, the young enthusiast market. Something that maybe you could take before bed, something that can get you out of bed. Fantastic. Except it took too long to regulate, and then once it's regulated, The tech isn't easy. To do a cannabis beverage, you're essentially mixing oil and water. I don't know if any of you have ever tried to do that, but it's not inherently an easy task. So making a consumer-ready product with that technology is going to take a few years. Canopy Growth Corporation, the largest weed company, which is aligned with Constellation Brands, one of the largest alcoholic beverage companies, recently announced they had to pull back their products in cannabis beverages because quality concerns were too high. If the two biggest guys in the market can't do it, then that's a problem for everybody else. So Weed 2.0 is not going to save us all. I would expect that what you're going to see is a survival of the fittest over the next year. The largest companies are going to join up with the largest companies. The guys that have the most money are going to sit back and wait to pick off the best assets. The weaker companies are all going to die off. We're already seeing some bankruptcies. A couple of those we called a year ago. Wayland Group is under bankruptcy right now. There's bankruptcy protection looming for MedMen. They haven't announced it yet, but they're certainly talking to their vendors about how they're struggling to pay their bills and looking for deals. MedMen was a company we criticized from day one at Equity.Guru and never stopped criticizing despite their lawsuit threats. And everything we said was going to happen has happened. So the high risk for investors in a situation like this is that people will look to see what opportunities they can jump on that will jet out of the dust of those bankruptcies. The problem is a lot of the assets for these companies are already spoken for. If MedMen goes to zero tomorrow, there's no wind up, there's no bankruptcy protection. First of all, they're a US company in the weed space, so they're not eligible for bankruptcy protection. But anyone who thinks that a divestment of assets will bring them an arbitrage situation, the guys that are lending their money at 20% right now have already got their hands on those assets. There will be nothing to have in a bankruptcy or otherwise out of cannabis. So, what do we do next? If cannabis is going the way of the dodo, is everyone going to jump into resources and suddenly start buying into gold? Well, before we get to that question, you've got to figure out who is the cannabis investor. A large number of cannabis investors are retail. Some say as much as 97% of the cannabis investing space is a retail investor. They're first-time investors, perhaps unsophisticated investors. Not exactly going to jump into this room and start going through 43 101s. So where else are they going to go? Well, we tried blockchain. That worked for a while. There was drones for a little bit. That was going to be the thing. 3D printing was going to be a thing. High-performance computing is now being talked about. Esports is being talked about. Before we get to the next thing, there's a couple of things in cannabis that I think we can still pick apart. There are some companies that I think have some value to be had. And full disclosure, some of these are clients. Supreme Cannabis, as an example, has a fat war chest, got hammered on the downside due to some cheap warrants and an unsophistication in telling their story. But they've been way oversold, in my opinion. They've got way enough money in order to survive through the dark times. They've got an asset that is well run. They've got quality brands that are actually picking up some consumer support. They're close to break even. They've got new management for the third time in 3 years, which is a problem. But I think that there's probably value to be had. G-Tech Holdings, not everybody's favorite, but I like them. Small, nimble company, 3 licensed facilities, manageable, quality product. A little close to the bone when it comes to finances, but I feel like they'll get through that. I trust management, and I've had stock in this company for the last 2 years, I think. 1933 Industries, also not a market darling, struggles to get a story out to the public, but a US company with quality products in a market that has a lot less regulation to worry about than Canada does. I feel like this is a company run by grown-ups, for grown-ups, and the grown-ups are starting to take notice. C21 Investments had a bit of a higgledy-piggledy ride on the markets because it was a little over-promoted. It made a lot of people rich, and then it made a lot of people poor. But at the center of it all, there is an actual series of assets that are making revenue. And I think this thing, at the moment, has been overlooked and is primed to run. Not a client, but has been previously. Oh, and Tinley Beverages, which I added this morning. With the struggles that Canopy and Constellation had in getting beverages out the door, Tinley actually has gone through those problems 3 years ago, and for the last 3 years has been working through them technologically. They currently have products in the California market that are not just winning Best Beverage Awards, but are winning Best Edibles Awards. So for a company that's been shit on by a lot of people because they didn't have a product out already, they've actually done the work of developing those products and getting them to a place where they can do what Canopy cannot. So what comes next? If you think Trump is a nut and we're all doomed, sure, gold is your thing. I tend to agree with that sentiment. I think we're all going to hell, and that putting your money in gold is probably a good thing. There's 30 other presentations here that will echo that. If you think Trump is a nut but you're under 25, sure, go crypto. I wouldn't go crypto because though you can make $1 million, you can't get your money back most of the time. So what's the point? If you think Trump's a nut but you're cool with that, then the military stocks or drones or things associated with that would be your go. I think there are a couple of drone stocks right now that are actually really interesting. They were also really interesting 4 years ago, so maybe it's not the time. But if we all go to war, a lot of things change on the market. And if you don't give a shit about Trump, esports has been bumbling around. It hasn't really taken off because no one's actually figured out that esports isn't about esports, it's about content. High-performance computing, we've been dealing with a company called Amped Technologies, which I think is a good deal. Got beat up a bit on the market, but is up by a double in the last 2 weeks. And artificial intelligence has not really reared its ugly head, but it will. One word though, when someone says their company is in artificial intelligence, a lot of the time what they really mean right now is we have software. That's not artificial intelligence. And if you watch charts all day, then silver, copper, palladium, everything out here right now is going up. For me, I take the Gretzky attitude of I don't want to know what's hot now. I want to know what's going to be, where the puck's going to be later on. And for me, none of this is where the puck's going to be later on. I'm going for shrooms. Now, I know what you're thinking. You've all got kids and grandkids that do fire juggling and play in drum circles on Third Beach and do magic mushrooms all day. Yeah, we're not talking about that. That's not the thing. Really, what we're talking about is the same thing we were talking about with cannabis in 2014. Now, in 2014, companies that were in the cannabis space weren't saying the words cannabis. They were saying technology, health and wellness, agriculture, science, anything to avoid using the actual word, which at the time was illegal to put in a public company. We're doing that now with mushrooms. There are companies out there that are looking to go public, that are in the mushroom space, but if you look at their websites, we'll say absolutely nothing about psychedelics. Everything is very much, we will do the legal things. We'll build a mushroom plant in Langley and we'll sell button mushrooms. They're not talking about what they really want to do, which is taking that mushroom technology, that mushroom asset, and turning it into a therapeutic medicine. Real therapeutic applications for psychedelics, let's call it what it is, that would also include LSD, it might include MDMA, it might include anything else in that realm, are big and getting bigger. There are large US venture capital-backed companies that are raising tens and hundreds of millions of dollars that are aiming to go into the microdosing space for shrooms, for LSD, and for all other associated things. We could include ibogaine in that. This will be where cannabis companies end up. Frankly, my experience with shrooms has been quite positive in the last 6 months. I thought, since this thing's getting big, I'm going to have a look and see what it does. So I met a guy behind a Denny's and had a great weekend. And in fact, the most recent Equity.Guru office party was a damn fine shindig. In 2014, dozens of mining shelves became cannabis shelves without ever mentioning cannabis. Brokers were pushing through cyclone fencing in back paddocks in Maple Ridge to try and find guys that could grow cannabis and could actually put a smile on the face of a shell company. That's happening now with mushrooms. I know there's a mushroom distribution company in Richmond that has stopped answering their phone because of all the brokers that are calling them, asking if they can do anything with psychedelics. There are presently a few court cases in the shroom space that are looking to do what the court cases in 2013, 2014 did with cannabis. If they manage that, if they get a friendly judge that says there's no reason for this to be illegal, then I would expect that the next day we're going to get press releases from at least a half dozen cannabis companies saying we're going to turn the lights off in the grow facility, we're going to start planting something new. Currently, there are millions of square feet of licensed, paid for, secured, fantastically, technologically fantastic cannabis grow facilities that no one's growing cannabis in right now because it's not realistically viable to do so when you can now grow it outdoors, when in a second and a half you're going to be able to export it from the third world. So why spend all that money growing cannabis in a glass roof by the airport in Edmonton when you can turn the damn lights off, put a cover over it, and start growing shrooms? That's what that will look like. It's what it looks like currently. There are mushroom grow facilities all over the Lower Mainland that are doing the grey market thing that cannabis growers were doing in 2014 before we made them all legitimate and gave them all millions of dollars to stop being legitimate. It looks like that. You take a cannabis grow facility right now, you stick those racks in it, it does the same job. The other interesting thing about the relations between now and 2014 is no one's being arrested for shrooms in Vancouver today. This is why I can get them from the guy behind the Denny's. He'll advertise on Craigslist. There's a mushroom dispensary downtown. No one's shutting them down. They've been open for a year. They're on TV regularly, and there's no one shutting them down. Shrooms are where cannabis was and will be the next cannabis. Now, problem, this is what the product looks like when you get it from the guy behind the Denny's. That's not exactly palatable for most of you guys. You're not going to throw that in your coffee in the morning. You're not going to bust that out at a dinner party when it looks like maybe it's been rotten for a couple of weeks. Bags of them at the dispensaries, that's what they look like right there. And this is what the products are starting to look like. And this is where it starts to get really interesting. At a dinner party, busting out a couple of chocolates, a couple of candies. The problem that cannabis has in this mindset is coagulation, right? You're dealing with an oil with cannabis. With mushrooms, you just grind them down. It's a consistent dose across the board. A lot of the technological problems of cannabis removed completely. You can do this in your kitchen, and it's not going to kill you. Or you can stick them in tabs, same as you can the cannabis. So currently there are a handful of companies, some on the public markets, that are dealing with shrooms, but they are all still speaking in code. Fear of regulatory halts, fear of financial regulatory problems is making them talk in words that they don't usually want to be telling. You got to read between the lines sometimes. This is the Think Myco website. I don't know if you can make out the text there, but the focus on advanced science, sustainable business models, and world-class research partnerships has led to the development of unique technologies and IP spanning the entire value chain of specific... There's not one mention of mushrooms there. If you search for mushrooms, you don't find this website. There's mushrooms in their logo, and if you sort of really dig in, you can probably find some talk about mushrooms somewhere. I know they've been dropping a few flyers around this hall by the water coolers, but this is a big company, well-financed. They're in the mushroom game. They're not talking about mushrooms yet. Field Trip is another one. Field Trip is going in the therapy clinics side of things. Universal Ibogaine is another one that's been raising money on that side. Again, not really getting into the mushroom talk, trying to keep it very medical. And if that reminds you of cannabis in 2014, it's because exactly the same thing happened back then. If you take this text and you remove the word therapeutic psychedelics and you replace it with cannabis, this could have been the Canopy website's about page 4 years ago. There are a couple of companies that you can buy into now that are in this space, very, 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 very smally. Yield Growth Corp is a CBD company from somewhat infamous shell company creator Penny Green. They've put out some announcements that they're getting into the mushroom space as regulations allow. Absalom came out of that group and is going public soon, same sort of deal. And Naturally Splendid, which has been around for quite a while and creates protein bars out in the Lower Mainland. They were doing hemp protein back before hemp was really a thing. They are doing mushroom bars now. They've had them on the market for quite some time. I will say they taste like ass, but I'm sure that will change over time. The thing of it is they have the technology to create actual mushroom bars that are on the shelves in health stores today, and they are not really recognized on the market for that. Companies like this will pop up. There will be a lot, I think, in the next quarter of big-name cannabis companies that will shift into that space. If you want any specialized shroom content, we've put up a website, shroomstocks.ca. It's pretty small right now, but we think it'll get there in time. And every other sector that you might be interested in, you can get at Equity.Guru. Thank you very much. I appreciate you coming out and filling this house. Let's have a round of applause equal to the one that brought me. Hey, there you go.